I focused most of my work in food and farming on agricultural biodiversity, agroecology, and food sovereignty, championing the ways to increase embedded biodiversity in our grains, our fields, agroecosystems, and food, which of course is the subject of this session. We're going to hear from John Letts, Marina, Chang, and Henry Astor in that order, and then we'll open the session for questions. Just some quick housekeeping. Please follow the chat etiquette. I think there'll be a reminder in the chat of what that is. If you want to raise a question, please put question at the beginning of your comment so that we can easily identify it. And my colleague Dan Crossley has kindly agreed to help monitor the chat and collate questions. And overall, just use the chat to introduce yourselves, to exchange information, and so forth. So I don't know where I got to. As we all know, the critical loss of biodiversity on farm, mainly due to intensive industrial production, poses an existential threat to the biosphere and indeed life on Earth. John is addressing this threat in a very practical way. And for those of you who are not able to attend his excellent session yesterday, John's work is focused on enhancing agricultural biodiversity at all levels, within the grain, within fields, and above and below ground in the agroecosystem. He's been a pioneer in developing this approach and set up the Heritage Grain Trust to promote it. He'll tell you a bit more about himself. So I think I'll hand over to John now to start his presentation. John.
I'm hoping it is. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I don't really want to say too much about myself, but my accent is, I should start off by saying Canadian rather than American for someone yesterday who was concerned about that issue. But I don't think that really matters where we're from. We're all very international. So actually, I should start by making the same point I said yesterday. For those who attended that session, I also apologize for some of the slides and some of the things I'm going to say, but I thought it was important, if we're going to talk about the problems, rebuilding or building a kind of an alternative grain, heritage grain supply system here, I'm going to have to cover some of the ground I covered yesterday because not everyone will know what heritage grain is, and I mean heritage grain in a broader kind of perspective. But I want to say that it's obviously a very international conference. There are people from all over the world listening. Certainly yesterday we had quite a turnout. And I'm speaking very specifically about what I know about grain in the UK context and conditions economically. We'll talk a lot about economics. And environmental conditions are hugely different, obviously, in Canada, America, China, Ethiopia, wherever people are listening from. So our context here is as one of the first industrialized grain economies in the world. So whether I'm talking about seed or land concentration, all of that is very UK specific, and I think it's important to raise that. So what I'm going to do is just run through roughly what I did yesterday, but I'm going to try to come on to the point of this, which is what are the obstacles to create. So I was going to say I'm going to talk about building a heritage grain sector in a broad sense, but I don't mean to rule out other alternatives that are happening, like YQ grain, anybody who wants to grow other forms of things. I'm just working on this approach that works to me, and I think is an interesting and useful way forward using agroecological methods. Anyway, that's blabbering. So I'm just going to review what I did yesterday, and to do that, I'm going to share my screen now. Let's hope we don't have any technological hitches, and I better maximize that. There we go. Everyone can see that, I hope. Okay, well, I started yesterday, and I'll say it again today, that I think modern conventional grain production is unfit for purpose in many ways. It's destroying the environment, it's reducing biodiversity. Clearly, the whole point of it is to remove the existing natural ecosystem and replace it with a monoculture, where every plant in the field is identical. And the only way you can maintain that kind of ecological stability is with massive inputs, particularly of nitrogen fertilizer. But because every plant in the field is identical, of course, you get diseases come in very quickly, so you have to use fungicides. And because these crops are, as I said yesterday, they're Formula One type crops. They're designed for growing in high input, particularly high nitrogen conditions, and to convert sunshine and oil into grain. So to do that, they produce a lot of sugar first, which they store in the plant, and then at the end, when the crop ripens, that goes pushed up into grain. So there's lots of sugar around to feed fungal diseases and pests. So you need pesticides and fungicides. Aside from all that, nitrates, slugicides, and growth regulators, you name it. Basically, it's a sterile system, and it's destroying the planet. It takes tons of fossil fuels. You drive your tractor up and down the field 10, 12 times a year, and it produces a lot of grain. That's true. It produces 6 times the grain of an organic system. So but that's just not sustainable. People say, well, we need to feed the world. We don't have an option. Well, we're driving our Formula One cars towards a brick wall at 200 miles an hour. And I think continuing on this course isn't going to solve any problems either. So, and with climate change happening, I just think there is no option. So I think that system doesn't work. It also doesn't work economically. Maybe it's important to start talking about the economics. That's just the point of this, is that economically, modern grain production, modern farming, all depends on subsidies. 60% of farm income or thereabouts, I know that's being reduced a bit, it comes from government subsidies, comes from the taxpayers. So 60%, you could argue, we could say it's not quite the same perhaps, but essentially 60% of our farmers are unemployed and on the dole and collecting state subsidy. Well, I don't think that's really natural or viable or sustainable either. And if that happened in society, if 60% of people were unemployed, I think we'd have a revolution. And that's what we need, a revolution in the way we grow grain. So the alternative has been organic production. Now, I'm an organic farmer. I'm very supportive, have been for many, many years. And there's some very benevolent organic grain producers that encourage weeds and biodiversity, there's no doubt. But I'm afraid I still see the organic sector as, in a sense, well, not in a sense, it's the acceptable face of industrial grain production and of not conventional. Obviously, we don't use chemicals, but it's still based on the premise, on the paradigm that to grow grain, you need high nitrogen, and you eliminate pretty much all the other plants in the field because you want to maximize that one plant, that one variety. Most organic farmers grow modern monocultures. They grow modern hybrid varieties that generally have quite short root systems. I know that's changing, and people are trying to select for organic varieties that do better than the others. But essentially, you're creating a uniform system. That is at the bottom layer of a crop within a modern and very well-respected organic production system. I don't see much biodiversity there. I see one kind of species. Now, and below ground, well, organic systems are still based on tillage. Everyone's moving to no-till, to low-till. I understand that, of course, creating a blackgrass problem when that happens. But basically, the organic system involves crop rotation. And I understand the need for crop rotation. And again, I'm speaking about grain here, not vegetables. And I think the organic system is fantastic for animals. We should, all of our meat, all of our animal products should be coming from organic production. I have no doubt about that. My point is that I don't think it works for grain production. And that's what we have to do. We have to increase the amount of grain we produce and stop growing it using the chemicals. And the problem I have with organic is the need for crop rotation, and particularly this obsession with high nitrogen. And to create that without chemicals, what do? You grow legumes, you grow clover. And organic grain producers that I've spoken to, and I've looked at this, and I know this varies around the country and around the world, but the general rotation as I see it, and I've done it myself, is a 3-year clover grass lay which builds nitrogen, takes nitrogen out of the air, and then you plow that down. Somehow you incorporate it. Now you can mulch it, there are living mulch systems, there are all sorts of other ways, but the general approach has been to plow that down. And when you do that, you hugely disturb the soil ecosystem. And the idea is you're pumping that dead organic matter, and other nitrogen's been released from the air anyway, and you're building nitrogen, which will then decay, mineralize, and release that to the growing crop. So then you grow 3 years of that, 1 year of wheat, milling wheat. If the nitrogen's enough, you get a good year and you have the right variety, maybe you'll sell it as milling wheat. But the second year, there isn't any nitrogen, so you grow barley or maybe a feed wheat or maybe beans, and there's different versions of that rotation. But essentially, over 5 years, an organic system produces one crop of milling wheat for human consumption. All the other years are about livestock. Organic farming is about livestock production. It's about animal foods. And as I say, I love dairy products, and I love cheese, and I have no problem with that. But producing 2 tons, an organic farm will produce 1.8, sometimes a lot less than that. If you're lucky, 2 tons an acre, and I'll speak in acres just because it's about comparison. I'm not very good with hectares. But anyway, 2 tons an acre in an organic system. Of course, 3 tons, 5 tons an acre in a conventional system. But as I say, I don't even want to go there. So over 5 years, an organic system produces 2 tons. A conventional system produces 30 tons. Somehow, we need to increase the output of non-chemical agroecological grain production. That's the goal. My approach is something I've been working on for a long time, inspired by, we all stand on the shoulders of our predecessors. I was hugely inspired by people like Fukuoka, and I think everyone's now accepting that we need to have healthy soil, you need living plants, you need a constant green cover, because all those soil bugs aren't just feeding on dead roots and dead organic matter that you've plowed down after your 3-year clover lay. What you want are sugars and other nutrients coming out of living green plants, a living mulch. So I undersow these cereal fields with white clover. And it's not brain surgery. People have thought of this before, I understand, but I don't think anyone's done it with the heritage grains, and they haven't looked at the crop that goes with it. So there's 2 components here. There's how you grow it, and the point is, I think, to have a stable and productive agricultural system is we have to mimic nature. So what I'm kind of trying to do here is to recreate or create a true grassland agro-ecosystem. So look at nature for the model of how we do this and then manipulate it. That's not what conventional farming does, certainly. It's just replace and eliminate. So I think we can use science and archaeology and history to draw in ideas about how to create the most sustainable, stable, resilient, and productive grain ecosystem we can. I've sickled inside a lot of crops. I'm not trying to claim we have to go back to medieval farming. That's not what I don't have a medieval smock, contrary to an article that recently came out. But I think there are lessons to be learned from the past. Medieval farming was extremely exploitative, not benevolent to the soil in any way. It was an extremely low input system. And that's what I want to do. I want to create crops that are adapted to low input systems and to create a system where all the nitrogen, which is really the main nutrient, is coming from the fallout, from the breakdown of organic material, from soil activity, mycorrhiza, we're scavenging nutrients, and then the clover legume. There isn't a huge tradition of crop rotation with legumes in the UK. We started it in in 1750, let's say, with the Norfolk four-course rotation. It's actually a Flemish four-course rotation. And that's the first time people used clover in rotations. And then we had artificial fertilizers from the 1840s, 1850s, imported lots of nitrogen from around the world. And then in the 1930s, we developed organic farming. So I think I understand why crop rotation is necessary in many cases, but I'm, again, speaking about grain, and I think there are natural ways of growing grain that just don't need that high input system. So what I do is I broadcast wheat into the standing stubble and with a clover understory. We cut that grain high on the stem. This is actually the first year. This was a field that was just a field of weeds on the worst soil you could possibly imagine. And we broadcast seed onto the surface and then mowed it, walked away, and came back and harvested 700 kilos per acre on a field that had never produced grain before. But the clover is now taken, and next year I reckon we'll have 1.1, 1.2 tons an acre. But the point here is that the only thing that comes off the field is the grain. All the straw, all that plant material is chopped and goes onto the ground and breaks down and releases nitrogen. And after I drill, we could direct drill if you have a direct drill, but many people don't have that. You can just broadcast. You can go into your back garden with a handful of wheat and throw it on the ground. Make sure it's winter or spring, and you'll have a small wheat patch, because it's a very tough plant. That's how wheat evolved. They're just wild grasses that we've managed to control. So after I throw that seed into the field or drill it, you just mow it, and that straw creates a lovely mulch to keep the birds away and protects the crop. It germinates and it grows well. And all I need to make this system work is about 1.1, 1.2 tons an acre. People say, well, that's outrageous. I can grow varieties that grow 5 tons an acre. How are you going to feed the world with that? Well, the UK is not feeding the world. 60% of our grain is fed to cows. A third of it is feeding humans. The only way we're going to make this system work, or we're going to feed the UK, is if we increase the yield. But if I get 1.2 tons every year for 5 years, I'm getting 6 tons in a 5-year rotation. Organic farmers are getting 1.8 or 2 tons. So that's 3 times the organic yield. And what I'm getting is about half the conventional yield. I think that's within reason. And if we reduce the amount of grain we feed to animals by 50%, half of the grain, I think, cows should eat grass mostly. But so if we reduce that by half, we're within reach of feeding the UK easily using a restorative continuous grain cropping system. And as I say, the problem is for every acre of organic grain, you need 3 acres of ley, and then really another year in the rotation. But let's say 3 acres. If we're going to produce the grain we're producing right now to feed humans and animals, we're going to need 13 million hectares of clover grass ley just to build up the nitrogen we need to produce that grain. Well, that's insane. We just can't do that. We have to chop down every tree in nature reserve, which of course we don't want to do. I want to rewild our wheat fields. That's really the way forward. And the only way forward is going to have to be to massively reduce, at least by 50%, our animal consumption, and then all those animals can be run organically. There are other...
John, can I just nudge you gently?
Okay, that's 15 minutes, is it?
Yeah.
My goodness,
absolutely.
It flies. I just want to say there are alternatives.
It's so interesting.
Okay, well, people are experimenting with what they'll call pasture cropping, and I've experimented with this as well. I think just growing wheat in straight rows in a pasture doesn't work for a lot of reasons. Agronomically, the yield, you can't put a cow and a wheat plant in the same field at the same time and expect to have lots of animal production and lots of grain, which is presumably why this field wasn't even harvested. But if I had £1 million for greenwash, I would be able to spread my message a lot quicker as well. That's quite a provocative statement, I know, but I think there's a lot of that going on, and I think these alternative systems people offer have to work, and I'm happy to answer questions and to have my approach questioned by anyone. The key is to have really genetically diverse crops. I've talked about heritage grains. People already know about that. We need if you have a tall stem, you have deep root systems. They scavenge nutrients, but the problem is the picture on the left is during a drought, the bundle on my left is heritage grain crops that were green and thriving and produced a wonderful yield, consistently 1.1, 1.2, 1.3 tons an acre. The one on the left is a modern hybrid, which pretty much failed. Now, we have very few of these left in our gene banks. We've lost so much of it from the 1850s when our grain revolution started. That's a variety called blue cone, a rivet wheat, if anyone knows about it. It's an old variety. It's very old, but it's still a monoculture if you grow it on its own. And what we need is diversity in the crop as well as in the field, to have that resilience. So I'm not just into growing pure line old varieties, which I call heritage if they're pre-1900. I want to grow mixed populations. Some of you know Holly, maybe she's listening. I want to grow mixed populations that can adapt and evolve to local conditions. So every plant in the field is slightly different genetically, will do better in certain conditions and weather. The only way to create these mixed populations is to keep the seed from one year and to resow it. This is what our ancestors did for 10,000 years. And we've come in, hubris is a word I've heard various people mention in this conference, and you know, we think we can do better. Over the last century and a half, we've had plant breeding, and what have we created? Formula One varieties that aren't really working anymore. That maybe they thought they worked in a period of cheap fossil fuels and cheap nutrients with no environmental problems. Those are externalities we can't face anymore. So there are examples of these land races from old thatched roofs. I've been working on these for 20 years. I've created populations that I think work and evolve, but a land race is a very specific term. They take a long time to evolve. It's about adaptation happens by different varieties producing a bit more seed, not just by growing a variety in a field for 5 years. That does not turn it into a land race. It might be micro mutations that happen, but a land race is something that happens over a long period of time in one area. So does this work? It definitely works. It makes lovely bread. There are bakers around the country using it. You know, the numbers aren't the same as for modern wheat, things like Hagberg and protein. You know, some of these older varieties, heritage varieties, pre-hybrid varieties, and I use that term very specifically because I think when I say a heritage grain, I want something that is descended from those old land races. It's very specific and connected to the past. And what happened is from 1900, there was intensive hybridization of crops. And so two pure line varieties were crossed with each other and then intensively selected. So you have huge uniformity happening, particularly after 1900, but even before that. So as I say, the key is to grow mixed populations. This is one of the best bakers in the country as far as I'm concerned, Kate Hamlin in Oxford. And she's producing bread that's just wonderful. And you know, one artisan bread loaf made with heritage grains with a beautiful sourdough is equivalent to what? Well, any number of Tesco loaves, but certainly in a nutritional sense, at least 2 or 3. And that's important to keep in mind. It also works in the sense of making wonderful booze, really, whiskey, gin, and I've had to work with the distilling industry because they're willing to buy the grain, and also wonderful beer. And I've been creating mixtures of barley varieties, including bear barley and many others that I'm growing with Henry Astor, who will come up very shortly if I ever stop talking, to produce wonderful beer. There's also other crops that we have to think about as we move into a period of different climate, all sorts of different crops. I don't call them ancient because all grain is ancient as far as I'm concerned. And heirloom doesn't mean much to me. It just means something you pass on. Heritage is a useful word because it means diversity and it means connections to the ancient past. And we have to go beyond even wheat and think about maize, for example. We can now grow seed maize in the UK. I love polenta. I love tortillas. And you can see the massive genetic diversity. That is the key we need. And that has been one of the problems that I think plant breeding has created and hasn't dealt with. And that is plant breeding industry has all been about narrowing the genetic base of our crops. So we can grow these crops in a sustainable way. We can have 3 times the yield of organic grain. We can, you know, this works. There's ample nitrogen out there from fallout, from clover, from the breakdown of straw. We can change the way we grow grain to massively improve biodiversity, sequester all the carbon possible, as long as nothing leaves the field except the grain. And these are systems that are resilient and stable and can adapt to the massive climate change that is coming. Now, I know you want me to, I want to stop sharing my screen, but I just want to quickly say something, if I may. Do I have at least a couple of minutes? 2 minutes, Patrick?
Just really 2 minutes, please, John.
Well, I mean, I've had to summarize. I hope that puts us in the context of where we're talking about, because we are talking about
That's right.
obstacles to the heritage grain movement.
Yeah.
And to me, there's obviously problems of you know, supply and demand. And the supply problems are we don't have any small farms in the UK. There are lots of small farms in India and other places where people are maybe listening from. In the UK, basically all of our land is highly concentrated, and to make it viable to grow grain, to buy a 1 million pound combine harvester, you need 1,000 acres, 2,000 acres. There are people who grow small amounts of grain, but that's usually to feed animals. So that's a big problem. And I need 20 acres, 50 acres. So it's very challenging to find a farmer who will do that. So it's about scale. We also have we have what, 3 or 4, perhaps a couple more functioning commercial stone mills. We've lost our milling industry. People can mill their own, but there is a skill in milling. And so we've lost that infrastructure. And also, how do you move this flour around the country? Let's say I have 20 tons of grain. Who puts it into a bag, even if I bag it up? How do I move it around the country? I go to a farmer's market and I sell 5 bags. I make 2 pounds. It doesn't work. So we have a very centralized food distribution system that we have to deal with. And obviously, most of our food is shipped around in supermarkets. Now, I instinctively have a problem with supermarkets, like many people here. However, if I want to get this heritage grain revolution working, I need to be able to sell my products. We live in a market economy. I desperately want to rebuild the decentralized, benevolent, localized grain economy. I've been trying to work on this for 25 years, first to create the crops and now moving into that area more. It's difficult. We live in a highly capitalized and market-based world in the UK, and we have to deal with that, which is what I think we're going to talk about. And I just want to say the last thing I want to say is seed, but we'll talk about that probably in the discussion. I don't think that seed is the problem. We have bad legislation. There's clearly a shortage of seed, but anybody can go to a gene bank and get the seed and create a mixed population and grow heritage grains. That's all possible. It's not illegal to go get it and do it yourself. It's illegal to sell the seed or give it to someone else, but that's doable. And I'm worried that there is some legislation that is being proposed related to a mixture called, to heterogeneous populations, which means genetically diverse populations, but not necessarily the old kind that I grow, but populations of modern elite varieties, hybrid varieties that have been crossed. For example, the YQ population is a version of that, which is a cross of modern varieties. That's designed for that fairly high input system. Now that's fantastic, and it grows really well if you've got enough nitrogen around in organic crop rotations. Brilliant, wonderful. And Martin Wolf, who we all wish was here with us at this conference, was a friend and did wonderful work, because the key here is diversity. Well, that was diversity within, if you take modern parents from a very narrow gene pool who share their ancestry and you cross them together, you still have a small gene pool. You're filling out the space in between, which is fantastic, and it clearly works well and can adapt to a certain degree within that high input system. I think we need a massive gene pool, a massive expansion of diversity. And I'm worried that some of this legislation is going to stop that. So I think I'll leave it there. But I think Marina will talk about this. I just want to say that if you look through the costing of something like the amount of flour in a loaf of bread or a pizza, I think we'll come up with some interesting figures to show that actually to shift to something like heritage grains is actually a minor part of the revolution I think we need. Sorry,
John,
I had to do it.
Thank you very much indeed. In fact, you've compressed about an hour and a half of discussion into this. Into these few minutes. Thank you very much for that. And I love your phrase, rewilding wheat fields. And as you rightly say, it's all about how to increase biodiversity. But let's move on to look at a little bit more about the logistics and about the grain chain from Marina Chang. She's an assistant professor at CORE at the Center for Agroecology. And her research interests are in sustainable food systems, food health, urban development, and community self-organization resilience. And she's been working on the development of the heritage grain sector in the UK. She's a co-director of the Heritage Grain Trust, which was formed to encourage the production and use of heritage grain. Marina, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I think I just want to say a few words before I show my slides. I think John has been working in this sector for 25 years and is in a quite unfriendly environment in the UK context. So it's not an easy journey. It's not an easy kind of way to develop and promote this new heritage grain revolution, and the real one, not the only the kind of abstract, but it's very grounded. And also working with him make me, as an academic, I can write and I can research, I can teach some subjects. But when it comes to reality, I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion and romanticize a lot of things. And that helped me to be grounded in the reality in the UK context. It's very different from where I'm from and from many other places in the world. I'm from Taiwan, and the situation is really different. So I think John's in the beginning of the remark saying we are in the UK and we're talking about UK context and how we are able to support this heritage grain movement in the UK, the genuine one, not the fake one. So that is my opening remark. And I would like to show my slides. Actually, John mentioned a few things. I was thinking only a few points as a starting point for us to discuss. Hopefully that will stimulate some kind of conversation afterwards. So let me show this shares. The first point, I think John mentioned about it. If you're an artisan baker or a pizza restaurant owner, you have the choice of using conventional flour made by kind of industrial farming system that destroy soil biodiversity, human health, and or you can consider using healthy flour made from milk from the organic or heritage grains. In my slides, I will try to compare. On average, it costs about 11 pence. If you make a 10 inches pizza selling for £12 in London using heritage grain compared to conventional chemical or industrial grains, and only 11 pence more to save the planet and many other benefits, and only 3 pence for modern organic grains compared to organic and heritage. And of course, the cost is slightly higher for bread. So if you make the, but not huge, given that most people using buying sourdough bread can be slightly well-off, wealthier in most consumers. So I think an artisan sourdough loaf sells about £5 in London and costs about 38 pence more extra if you're made from only heritage grain instead of conventional flour. And this is about 7 pence more using organic flour per loaf. So if you're willing, you're an artisan baker and a restaurant owner, if you consider willing to pay a few more pence for your pizza or bread, you are able to support the development of a genuine heritage grain movement in the UK. I say genuine here because there are farmers and food producers who claim their grains are heritage grain or bread using heritage flour, but it's not always true because there is a huge difference between using a handful of heritage flour and or only heritage flour. And there are a lot of farmers growing modern monoculture varieties, and that is all a very few selection of the wheats and the co-heritage or heritage grain. So this is not, there's a quite a details in the marketing and how we communicate those information to people and consumer. And the second point, as John already mentioned about, in the infrastructure logistics things, it's not in place in this country to help the distribution and retailing of at the scale. So not many people actually know about 3 or 4 traditional stone mill still in operating on a commercial scale, and that a lot of traditional skills and knowledge are required to make it a viable business, and very few national and regional distribution and retailing system that can deal with a large scale for flour distribution. So we also need kind of equipment for small scale grain production and processing, including harvesting, cleaning, drying machines. And and sometimes we talk about certification and labeling, not necessarily always kind of supportive for the small producers, because there's a lot of hassles for them to actually follow all the regulations. So as John just mentioned in his remarks, saying we all know the problem with the supermarket, especially I'm academia, I'm doing a lot of research on that. But on the other hand, we also have to understand there probably we shouldn't rule out working with supermarket or retailers who are collaborating with them, with those companies who are able to support and share the values of heritage grain movement. And this might make me unpopular, but I think that is a step for a more decentralized and localized grain chain. Sometimes, as I said, I'm grounded in the reality. So easier as academic, we're easier to condemn or to critique existing problems, and rather than create a real new agroecological grain movement that we all desperate want to see happen. And my third point is there's a kind of wide range of things. Alternative grain movement probably needs to work together, come together to understand certain terms like heritage grain or genetic diversity, population, land races, low input, sustainable agriculture, so the terms, for example, sustainable, regenerative, or restorative grain production. These are the issues we need to be clear what we are talking about, what we are supporting for. So united, we can stand, and divided, we will fall. That is as simple as that. But of course, the challenge is immense, and how we're able to find the common ground and trying to build the movement and build the strong alliances that moving forward. For example, we need to, not only for business, it's integration, it's an integrated approach. We need to kind of combine the integrate effort in education, the research, the business, community development, and policy. We all want to support, for example, a movement that no longer externalize the true cost of industrial grain production, whether that is ecological, health, or nutrition, or social cost. We need to work together to build a coherent force for change. And my last point is a bit more personal story. I'm a volunteer at a community garden in Carthorpe Community Garden near King's Cross in central London. And this is a very vibrant, multicultural and immigrant community center. I organized trip and events, introduced Chang's heritage grain flowers and heritage grain approach by inviting and also inviting our members to become community bakers and showcase their original food cultures and heritage. And the underlying assumption is a biodiversity and cultural diversity should work hand in hand, work together, because some of these immigrant community members, they from Latin America, Africa, India, Middle East, other Asia countries, still have vivid memory of land and crops in their hometown. They instinctively understand an appropriate Chang's mixed heritage grain population. They understand it because they say it, that they know their grandparents, they still have the memory, they still have the connection with land, with crops, with plants. And so they quite surprisingly, you don't really need to give them all the data. I say, I see it, that is how we grow up. And I remember that, how my grandparents grew their food. So that kind of connection is really encouraging. So I remember one community member originally from an indigenous community in Latin America once said to me, I'm a poor mother. and with very little money. But I will buy John's flour for my son, not only because it's more healthy and nutritious, much better than Tesco bread, but because I want to support John, who is doing that for us, and it's not only for his own sake. I want to support his vision and his idea, kind of drawing our ancestor wisdom from the past to deal the modern crisis. So she said, our health and well-being is priceless, and our planet is priceless. And I would like to end my story here. Thank you.
Marina, thank you so much. That was very, very energizing, and you cover, you know, these big obstacles, you know, the logistics, having the grain chain, being able to get heritage grain to people, to artisan bakers, to pizzerias, and all the rest of it. And as you mentioned, and John emphasized in the chat, you know, it's really only a few pence extra to be able to make high quality bread, high quality pizza, and isn't that worth it to save the planet, as you said, John? I mean, there's a whole set of issues which we can come on to in the discussion about labeling. As you know, in the Real Bread campaign, they've been trying to get a label for sourdough, so it actually means something real bread rather than fake bread, and all of these other definitions that you're talking about really need to be addressed. But let's get into the meat of the subject in a way, in terms of what is being done commercially on the ground. Henry Astor, who's a third generation farmer of 2,000 acres in the Cotswolds, and he's gone through many iterations, including dairy herd, beef, intensive pig in the 70s. But today the farm's mainly arable, but increasingly diversifies with rare breed cattle, English longhorn, Gloucester spot, saddleback pigs, and sheep. And over the last 2 years, the farm has been transitioning to a continuous cropping, living mulch growing system using heritage grains, including wheat, barleys, and rye. And this year, the farm will be cropping 450 acres of heritage grains. Your story is wonderful, Henry. I'm really looking forward to hearing from you. Over to you.
Thank you, Patrick, and thanks, John and Marina. Man, I always learn more and more when I listen to you guys. And Marina, actually, I just get more optimistic, because I think if we do have a system that can support farmers with heritage grain that makes commercial and economic sense, then we're really onto a winner. And I think a lot of the issues that we're faced with today are solvable through this system, and hence the reason I'm working with you, and hence the reason why we're embracing it at Bruin. And I just I think I'll spend a little time on what I see as at Bruin, and then what I see as the problem, and then how we're trying to deal with a solution at Bruin, and tie that into heritage grain. So I sort of build, I have a little tagline under, because we have a farm shop now, that says healthy soil, healthy food, healthy people. And it really helps me to sort of focus my mind on these three principles with whatever we're doing. And heritage grain ticks every single one of those boxes. And when I say healthy people, I mean biodiversity, the community, all sentient beings, basically. So my father, and who is very passionate about wildlife and biodiversity and loves planting trees, has done an incredible job here. We have 450 acres of woodland, and we planted 30,000 trees 3 years ago, and just and leave our hedges and have a wonderful rebounding bird population and all that. But this contrasted with this conventional farming that we've been doing for over 30 years. And I think about 9 years ago, and so on the farm, I should just say that we have these some cattle. I opened a farm shop, which has done incredibly well. We started a market garden, which is up and coming. And what actually that farm shop did is it started to build a community around the farm. As you know, a lot of arable farms are men in tractors, usually men in tractors driving around. You don't get to talk to them and see them. And this farm shop has sort of brought people together. And a lot of the stuff that we have in there, the venison, the pork, the beef, is all from the farm. So we're changing and we're diversifying the way that we farm. We also give space to a place called the Chippy Larder to come and experience growing food and harvesting food and collecting eggs. So we're trying to get the community involved in what it means to eat and grow healthy food. I just take a view of modern farming as it exists as absolutely horrifying. I think agribusiness since 1946 has just destroyed the environment, and we as farmers have been locked in one form or another to really kind of working for them as subservient workers that and I think I made this analogy at Groundswell, that I kind of see my farm as like a kind of junkie, like a heroin addict that is being fed, drip fed these drugs that and the resistance that I have, my farm has, means that the drugs get stronger and stronger, and of course the farm gets weaker and weaker. And about 9 years ago, and I think on a positive note about agribusiness, it seems to be only a very few companies that are kind of really doing the major destruction, like Macmillan, Cargill Macmillan, Yarra, AMD, and and of course Monsanto Bayer, which I read somewhere owns 70% of the seeds that we grow. And it just, sometimes when I think about the marriage of Monsanto Bayer, I mean, it's a bit like, I don't know, it's a bit like Joseph Stalin and Rupert Murdoch getting together to sort of create a PR company. I mean, it's just a really, really bad idea. And those are the people that we have to deal with. And it's just not a healthy environment. So when we look at farming and agribusiness as a whole, it is, as we know, very destructive, and something that I'm really keen to get out from under. One of the, also I think we're slightly beholden here in this country to things like Red Tractor, which is a farm assured system that we pay into in order to sell our grain. You will notice that on any loaf of bread, there is not a Red Tractor logo. And the reason is because if you're importing grain or flour into this country, you don't need to have Red Tractor assurance. So, all these things to me are troubling. And AHDB, which we have to, the agricultural and horticultural, what's it called, database, or anyway, it's compulsory for us to pay money in order to operate, in order to sell. I mean, it's like sort of shakedown almost, so there are all of these institutions, there are all of these kind of cartels and rackets going on that we have to pay in order to be a part of a system that is degrading the soil, that is keeping us, in check, and not giving us the freedom to build our biodiversity and really empower ourselves as farmers. And with that, and John's mentioned, is the supermarkets. And I think the supermarkets are as guilty for the destruction, especially I think of human health. And you can see the graph of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and all the disease that we have today goes in parallel with the intensity and quantities of pesticides, fungicides, and insecticides that we put on our farm. The two are absolutely correlated. So I think 9 years ago, we decided that that we needed to change, and we saw that the cost also of these inputs was going up and up. The cost of machinery was going up and up, and you know, we became incredibly worried. And at the same time, you know, begin to see properly see the weather patterns changing. So much more intensive rain and much longer droughts at funny periods like in February or January, and having these effects on yield and on biodiversity and on the entire sort of ecosystem here. So in 2 years ago, we got our hands on some Miller's Choice, which was this heritage grain that was sold, and we planted 10 acres alongside some conventional wheat, and we noticed and had put no inputs, and we noticed two things. And the first thing is we noticed that it grew quite tall, and the second thing is that there was no blackgrass in it. And if you looked at this field, I think it was about 30-acre field, the entire field was covered with blackgrass except for this one strip of Miller's Choice. Anyway, so we were on this kind of course, but we didn't really, and we were discussing kind of ways of how could we create a food system which built up our soil, so this healthy soil, which created healthy food that we could deliver to a local community, to a to our local community. Could we build a system and a viable business around that? And so I met John at a talk about heritage grain, and a very long story short, we decided to. He was working with a distillery called Toad, the Oxford Artisanal Distillery in Oxford, who guaranteed us a price per acre to grow heritage grain. So what that did is it took all the risk that we thought might be with growing heritage grain, and so even if we'd grown 200 kg, they would have paid us the money for the acre. And so we put in John, I can't even remember how many acres we put in, actually. I'm blanking it, but we put quite a few acres in. And then the other thing we did is we sowed the understory with white clover, and John and I were talking about, spiking this white clover with what people would probably call weeds, but we would call, pollinators that, could we actually build up the bug life? And the reason we wanted to build up the bug life, and we thought we could do that confidently, was because we were growing a healthy system of heritage grains which had this population diversity. So within the field, there were between 100 and 130 different varieties of grain in this field, which gave resistance to disease and pests. And we, as John explained, disease and pests really attack poor systems and weak systems, and this was a strong system. So we grew it, and we got 1.2 tons an acre. And so on the other side too, how am I doing for time, Patrick? I've completely lost. And so one of the issues that I had was on the other side of the whole system, where I saw these frontier trucks coming along and taking away my grain for the lowest price possible, and taking it to God. And I have no idea where they took it to, probably to make that crappy bread that you find in the supermarkets. But I really wanted to be in control of where the food that I produce goes to, and how and in what form it goes. And so we started I started reaching out to bakeries and mills and to breweries, who were all very keen to take this and to start using it. And I found myself driving on weekly and monthly basis around to some bakeries. I would get the grain milled at this beautiful old water mill about 20 minutes from here by these two old boys who would this stone mill. And and I'll wrap up on this because I know, but I think in that process and in that that action of reaching out to the end user, I felt as though I was beginning to build a community which had its kind of roots sort of pre-agribusiness, kind of pre-World War One, that felt psychologically like I was on really kind of strong footing, that I knew the destiny of this food. I know it sounds slightly bonkers, but I think we've lost so much connection with what we're doing as farmers. I think, a long time ago, during Enlightenment, we were told all of a sudden that we as humans had dominion over all living beings and the earth. And then coupled that with science, we decided that we were going to study, about nature and not learn from nature. And I think that what the heritage grain system sort of gives me and gives this farm is this idea that we can bring it back to really learning about nature and just trusting, as I said in my little title, 400 million years, of evolution. There's 400 million years for Mother Earth, nature, to get this right. Okay, scientists have had since 1913, and look what they've done. Look what they've done. And I know they've got these great titles in front of their names and after their names, and they've gone to great universities, but we have relied on scientists and chemists to give us the answer in agriculture, and we're in a serious crisis. So I really want to start learning from 400 million years of evolution and incorporating that back into this system, and building a healthy food system that has food security while increasing the biodiversity. And that's kind of my aim. And I think heritage grain is the answer to a lot of that. So I appreciate you giving me the time to say my little piece. And I really appreciate working with John and Marina on this. It's just been a wild ride, and we're really only at the beginning. And I just think I would love to see little groups of farmers around the country who are reaching out to their bakers, distillers, and building these collaborations and sharing seed, and and bringing communities back to life, as well as bringing soil back to life and bringing people's health back to life. That's it. Thank you,
Henry. That is absolutely wonderful. It's an inspiration, and I think the example that you provide in Bruin Farms is something that really can be looked at being copied by so many, and more power to you. The in a sense, your last comment leads into a sort of generic question that's been coming up in the chat, and maybe we could ask each of you in turn. I mean, the question is, how can you take this to a wider audience? How can you get more people involved, be they growers or millers or artisan bakers? What's in very briefly, what's your answer to that? Maybe start with you, Henry.
Well, my big fear is if this gets too big, agribusiness will just come in and they'll own it, and they will license it, and they will make sure that we have to buy and license their seed. I think that what we, again, just from the last thing I said is, we have, I mean, in my area, there are thousands of people, there are little villages, there are towns, Birmingham, 60 miles or 40 miles away, or whatever. There are enough people to sustain not just my farm, but all the farms around. There's enough business there to build this community and to build the relationships with these bakers, with these brewers, with these distillers. I think the key is not greed. We have relied on a system which is based on yield, which is based on greed, okay, and destroying the natural capital. Cargill Macmillan are the 14th richest company in the world. They're a privately owned company. What's his name? Henry Waxman, the senator, called them probably the most destructive company in the world. Okay, I don't want to get big. I'm not looking to make billions of dollars off heritage grain. I'm looking to build a robust, sustainable community of growers, of people who, and a robust, sustainable soil and robust, sustainable hedgerows and biodiversity that allows me to run a business, to employ people. By the way, we had 3 people 3 years ago. We've now got 8 people because we're diversifying. We're reaching out to other companies to, mill our flour, whatever it might be. So if we talk about yield and get greedy and we can make money out of this. Yeah. And do you know what's interesting? After the groundswell, I just finished on this, the groundswell, the amount of people who called me up, land agents, called me up and said, how do we get some of this? How do we get this? Because we can sell it for £1,500 a ton. And to me, that kind of misses the point.
No, you're absolutely right. And I mean, we've talked a bit about this in the past about keeping things sort of localized, a little bit local, having a better connection perhaps between the grower and the miller and the miller and the baker. And as you say, not looking to outscale, not to create vast empires which can be taken over by industry. But Marina, I mean, you touched on this very much in your last comments about the working with local communities. I mean, what would be your key point in getting the message out and getting more people to adopt the heritage grain system?
Yes, I think the working with community is really encouraging because people actually understand and they are really connected to it. And of course, there's always a price issue and affordability. And I personally really don't like the idea of voting with your wallet. That kind of approach is thinking of very bourgeoisie or very middle class. However, if you actually, as I said, if we communicate, people are aware of the true cost of things, and people actually quite supportive, and people very sympathetic, and they said, we want to prioritize what we want, what we can afford, what we are really care about. And also that is one part. So community members are quite supportive and quite enthusiastic about these grains, in particular in London, in the urban environment, you never see wheat. So when I brought people in the farm to John's farm and Wales House, and they can see that connection, the urban environment and the rural communities, so how we make that linkage more visible, viable, and meaningful. And on the other side, as an academic, I think it's also very important to know the role of science. We are very, there are a lot of issues. John talked about the genetic diversity, for example, or population, or cross-pollination. All these issues are quite confusing even within my peers. So I think there is a lot of work to clarify those terms, and we can come to understanding to support real sustainability and that in order to build a movement. So among, as I said in my remarks, saying among the alternative grain sector, probably we need to come closely to collaborate and building a very strong alliance.
Thank you, Marina. I agree, and that collaboration that you talked about in your talk. John, key thing. What's the key thing to get this message out?
Well, I've been selling heritage grain flour and products for 20 years, I suppose, embarrassingly. And it's really picked up in the last 3, 4, 5 years. I mean, it was a lonely field 15, 20 years ago, but there were people very committed. I think there's massive consumer demand. Problem has been, how to get it to them. So online sales help that, and I'm working soon with Bakery Bits to relaunch some of my heritage lines. But I think the artisan baking sector, it's a huge marketing opportunity for them. as Marina said, I worked through all these figures about the extra cost on a loaf of bread or a pizza, like 11 pence, really to 3 pence to use heritage flour rather than organic flour. It's not a big difference to create, to support, to save the planet. It's that simple. And I think that, artisan bakers and pizza makers, we're all self-employed businessmen, small businessmen trying to do our own thing. And of course, we all need to pay our bills, and we live in this market. But I think there's a market opportunity for people, for bakers, for example, to reach out and say, look, this loaf is, 33 pence or 8 pence or whatever more than another loaf, because this is supporting a heritage grain movement. And, it's not just, I'm not saying it's supporting just my flour, like I say, an alternative, broader, genetically diverse heritage grain movement. I think people want that. You're pushing through an open door. And this is the only way it seems it's going to work in the UK. We have to use the market. It's that simple. I want to rebuild a decentralized, localized, community-based grain system. Fantastic. Let's all do that. But the reality is the world we live in, where there aren't any small farms. A question came through about equipment, for example. There's almost no small-scale equipment. I use an 1895 Gooch winnowing machine to clean my grain. We could design this. There seems to be billions of pounds out there for all sorts of innovation, but not in the small-scale grain sector. There's been no funding whatsoever. There are a lot of big farmers who want to grow this grain, who are very environmental, and they have organic farms. But the fundamentals underneath, there's very, very little funding. And what funding there has been, to some degree, I think has been very focused on tweaking the existing high input system and producing new varieties, for example, that are adapted to those high input systems. We really need to refocus. It really is a paradigm shift. I just want to say one thing while I have this little box in front of me, is what you said about Henry. What Henry said about the licensing and the fears that the big companies will get it. That's true, I think. But to some degree, we're protected by the policies in the licensing right now that prevents heritage grains from being spread around. So it keeps it into this alternative sector, theoretically. And, you can develop your crop, or, we have many farmers growing for us, like Henry, who grow on contract. That's not illegal. Passing the seed around, as is happening everywhere, is technically illegal. And I've definitely had phone calls from DEFRA about it. And I think they'll tighten up in the future. So I think we have to be really worried that legislation that comes in doesn't make it harder for us and easier for the people who are tweaking that high input system, because the companies, the grain companies, the seed production companies, they're aware of this, and they're going to be on top of it, and they're going to do what they can to take advantage of this alternative sector. It'll be grain wash. It'll be about the money. So I think we have to really put our heads together and make sure that we do continue to control, the seeds of our ancestors. It's the same struggle that's happening in India and many other countries around the world. What's left, they're fighting to preserve. Ours are all stuck in gene banks. Let's just hope they don't bring in some crazy rule. I shouldn't say this because they'll then adopt it, that we can't access grain from gene banks. But that's an international law that everybody has to abide to so far.
Right, there we go. So yeah, absolutely. And on the question of DEFRA and policy, there were some questions, I think, from Becca as well about the effect of DEFRA legislation. I don't think we've got time to go into that in detail, but simply to say that there's a big issue there about whether or not there will be legislation to curb and hopefully at some point to encourage this kind of approach. By the way, Kate Hambling has got a hand up. Did you want to ask a question, or is it?
Or speak?
Kate, did you want to ask something, or is your hand just up, or whatever? I mean, if not, Becca, are you there? You asked this question about the new legislation. Did you want to elaborate on that a bit? Otherwise, we'll move on. So John Hope asked if you start a heritage population with seed from gene banks, you're going to start with very small amounts. How long do you reckon it will take to bulk up and have enough seed to sow a 10-acre field, John?
Rapid calculations in my mind. A 10-acre field would need 10 times 85 kilos, so that's about a ton. If you start off with a handful, you have a 10-fold increase every year, thereabouts, depending on your birds and your problems. And so over 5 or 6 years, you can bulk up, let's say, a handful to about a ton. Because once you have 10 kilos, you get 100 kilos, then you've got a ton. So the last couple of years you can do with machinery. The early years you do by hand. And I have sickled and threshed by hand far too many small handfuls of grain in my life to want to do it anymore. But there's a difference. You don't have to grow them as separate lines. You could grow them theoretically as a blend. But 5 or 6 years, and then that crop's got to develop and adapt to local conditions. So the key is to start with as much diversity as you can manage at the beginning and bring it forward as a population.
And sort of building on that, there's a number of other questions from Lars Lindström, for example, in Sweden, about accessing seeds. For example, what's it? Rye brome, a spring sown variant and autumn sown, 80 populations from all over Europe. Do you have any knowledge about how common it is in UK? Is it possible to access the seeds? And then Andrew Ferguson asks about the heritage barley that you're growing. Are there opportunities to grow heritage barley for brewers? And Samuel Morgan asks about the potential for heritage wheat varieties also to produce thatching straw.
Well, I really would love to talk about the thatching straw. Can I start? But I'll start with the brome. Brome is the grass, and I've collected wild grass seed or wild grass, brome, cultivated grass seed, and you can certainly make a flatbread from it. We made some at Wakelands at the ORFC last summer, in fact, and it was delicious if you ferment it. Should I give this away? I've made black grass bread, and I'm hoping to make black grass beer. That would solve one of our great weed problems. Eat your enemy, eat your problematic weed, the COVID of all grain production. It's got starch, but I don't know about its nutritional or potentially toxic effects. So I think you have to be careful. The beautiful thing about sourdough baking is it's hugely detoxifying. Basically, anything that goes through a long ferment sourdough, a real one, not just a few hours, will detoxify so many problems. The second question was what? I've already forgotten.
So that was the thatching one.
That's the third one. Well, the thatching. Sorry.
Then there was about heritage barley and the opportunity for brewers.
Yeah, that's an opportunity we're taking forward. Henry and I are growing lots of barley. We had a wonderful barley mowing festival actually last fall, that others would be with scythes. Yeah. Anyway, there are opportunities. We're working with Chris Malting Group to make that happen. There's a lot of interest amongst craft brewers, and we're going to make that malt available through a wholesaler as well, it appears. The problem is the malting companies are geared up to massive scale production, on shockingly massive scale. And having 20 tons malted is a bit of a challenge. But we're getting there. There are basically there aren't any, as far as I know, small scale micro malting units in the UK. You have to go to some big malting companies, but that's happening. But please let me say about thatching. I wrote a book on thatching. I wrote 3 books on thatching for English Heritage actually in the past. I think my whole journey in heritage grains really started by looking at ancient thatch and working with thatching straw growers to improve the quality of straw so that the roof would then last longer and they wouldn't have to strip it off and replace it with imported water reed, and we could keep our thatching traditions going. And I tried to encourage the thatching industry to grow taller varieties, but they're also addicted to the kind of shorter ones, and they wanted the yield of the straw. And I think there's a movement back towards finally recognizing the old varieties. And basically there were 1 or 2 old varieties that were grown, which some people are even calling heritage, but Maris Widgeon and Maris Huntsman are not heritage varieties from the 1960s and 70s. Squarehead's Masters is. So there's a huge opportunity to use good quality thatching straw made from heritage grain, so you can grow straw and grain And that might work very well in a continuous cropping system, where my fear with the system I have with clover understory is that I'm building nitrogen above the levels I want it to be. I want to keep the nitrogen low. If it starts to build up, I'm going to take a crop off as a thatching straw, maybe even every 3 or 4 years, because I don't want the nitrogen to build up too high. So we can thatch our roofs with straw that will last twice as long as modern straw, plus eat the grain or perhaps drink the beer and the gin made from the very grain from that same crop. So I think it's a huge opportunity. I don't know if that's enough of an answer about thatching. Don't get me on thatching. I'll talk forever about thatching.
Sorry, my connection.
Oh, okay.
my connection is not very good. No, there's another set of questions. In fact, thank you everybody for putting in masses of questions, and I'm afraid we won't be able to get through them all. Some of them are a little bit rhetorical, and maybe some of them can be answered subsequently after this session. But there's a set of questions, and perhaps Georgina Pickworth has got it more coherently in terms of the availability of heritage flour. And she says she knows many bakers in the Southwest who are using heritage grain where possible. But she asks specifically, do you know bakers who are producing loaves with 100% heritage flours? And how good is the uptake of these by consumers? Let me just say in brackets, I have a bag of your heritage flour downstairs, and I'm making sourdough bread 100% with your heritage flour, and it's delicious. But John, what do you know?
If Kate Hamblin is still on, I think she's kind of given up. But if she's still there, Kate, you might want to say something, hopefully positive. But she's been using heritage flour for a long time, and a few other bakers are. And, it clearly works. It works really well. And I could give you a list of bakers who've used it 100%. Kate does mix it sometimes. And fundamentally, they're, an artisan baker's a craftsman, and they're going to do what they want to do. They want to blend the flours they want. It's one thing to throw a handful in and call that loaf a heritage grain loaf and sell it for twice the price. People are doing that. And there are people claiming they're making heritage grain bread when there isn't a speck of heritage grain in it. I know someone who's selling.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can, Kate. I can. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Can everyone else
yes,
hear Kate?
Yes, we can hear you.
Go, Kate. Wonderful. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm good. Happy New Year. It's 100% possible to make bread with 100% mixed population heritage flour. There will be quite a lot of considerations with process and also with the kind of financial implications that we've discussed. But not only is it possible, when we've done it at the bakery, for example, with the Oxford population, it is the most popular bread in the shop.
There you go.
Yes. Wonderful, Kate. Thank you for saying that.
Thank you, Kate. That's wonderful.
Thank you.
That's really good. And I think maybe we could just have a quick comment, a final comment from Marina and Henry, and then a final word from you, John. We've got a couple of minutes left. Marina.
I think a lot of consumers and home bakers, they also recognize that using the heritage grain flour is really positive, and a lot of feedback we receive. And also the community members I work with, they always said the flavor is better, and they understand the story behind that, and also how you bulk it up, like John doing that from hands of very, very small seeds, become a field that takes years. And I was doing in the farm. I know how difficult it is as an academic again. And another point is, I think now is a very important time to give a new narrative, a new understanding and education. So we're all educators and we're all learners to get to this essence of sustainability, the real point of sustainability. We working in university and community and business, we all have to start to the journey together to understand why we do it and how we do it and how we do it together.
Thank you, Marina. Henry,
And
last
just,
comment.
and rolling on from that, I think, and you know, there is a danger, and it's already happening, that can I say grain wash, that heritage grain is being blended and misappropriated. I mean, especially with spelt on supermarket shelves, and that it's going to be taken, and it will go the same way that in some respects the organic food and movement has gone, in that there'll be a lot of greenwashing and a lot of advertising and PR thrown at it if the big companies see that there is money to be made in it. And I would just stress that heritage grain is more than just a loaf of the bread. It's about how we grow it. It's about the community in which we grow it. And it's about the entire ecosystem in which it's grown. And we have to keep all of those things in mind when we're growing it and when we're selling it and when we're eating it, and protect it as we want to protect our ecosystem.
John.
I just want to say how happy and grateful I am to be able to work with Henry and Marina, and you've done wonderfully today, Patrick. But you know, to find a radical farmer like Henry who really is deeply committed to this is just, you know, everything I've done for 25 years, it might not go anywhere until you have a committed farmer who's willing to help. And it's not always easy to shift from a massive production system to something smaller, but Henry has been marvelous, and we're going to take this thing forward. And to work with Marina, she's my inspiration in so many ways. She's so much more organized than me, but it's that community and kind of social justice commitment, which is constantly there for her, and I'm really impressed by that. I just want to add one little comment. Also, I'm glad Kate came on, and I did not promise her a free bottle of heritage grain gin to make those positive comments, and we can have other bakers to do that. So I feel that we've, you know, if it works in the bakery, if it works in the bottle, if it works in the field, it does everything on the label. The trick now is to work together and to find ways of making that actually very small commitment to make it happen even more. And I think if we can't do it now, in a period where the planet's collapsing, when are we going to do it? We're running out of time. I was just in Canada, where in British Columbia, I think I said that yesterday, you know, 6 months ago, it was 50 degrees above of heat. Last week when I was there, it was 50 below. And in between, they had massive floods that destroyed so much of British Columbia. And that used to be what people called God's country. Climate change is hitting us in the developing countries and leading to crop failure as much as it is in parts of the developing world. And they're going to bear the brunt of it far more quickly than we are. Where are we going to import our grain? What does a poor country do to import its grain? This is a huge issue we have to deal with now, and we have the tools to do it if we can work together and make a personal and a social commitment.
John,
Patrick, thank you for that.
You absolutely hit the nail on the head there. And I mean, the whole approach of building this heterogeneity, this diversity into the grain, into the fields, into the ecosystems, into the biosphere. It's at the root of the solution to some of the intractable problems we have, not least biodiversity loss, not least climate change. I thank you so much for that. I think that my catchphrase from all of this is that this system bakes biodiversity into the food system. It's wonderful to be with you. Marina, thank you. Henry, keep going with Bruin Farms and let it be outscaled massively. And John, you're an inspiration. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you all for patiently asking your questions, going into the chat. It's been a very lively, very practical, and very inspirational session. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick.